Thanks, Angela. Hi, folks. Welcome along to County Longford. Welcome along to this leg of the Regional Development Programme. Tonight, we're talking about music law, and we're joined by Eileen O'Gorman and Willie Ryan, two very experienced and highly vocal music law experts. So they're going to kind of go through a sort of like what's involved from their point of view, what they're how they work, who they've worked with, just the ins and outs of it. So we'll talk for about 40 minutes or so, and then there'll be some time for questions. If you've got questions as we go along this evening, please put the questions into the chat field below. The second hour of the show will be basically myself and Shane Crossan, who's the arts officer in County Longford, who's facilitated tonight's event. We'll be just discussing kind of like what's available from the Longford Arts Office for musicians in the county, what things he'd like to try, why he hasn't tried them yet, and what other ideas he's looking at. So we're going to start with the music law thing. So we're joined tonight by Eileen and Willie. Eileen, we're going to start with you. Just tell us a little bit about yourself, like how you started in law in the first place, who you represent, and any other information you think maybe of use to this panel.
Okay, well, I took a bit of a scenic route to law because I managed a radio station in Dublin for 5 years in my 20s, Dublin City FM. And I suppose when I was in there, I thought there's a lot of stuff here. I'm really interested in the legal end. So I went back and I trained and qualified as a solicitor. And I worked in a financial services firm, big firm in the IFSC. Wasn't really for me. In that grey tie to suits, going to work every day. So I came across Leeson and Grab Baldwin in the Hot Press yearbook, and they were the only Irish lawyer at the time doing music law in the yearbook. Just to say as well, I'd also worked the box office in Queelan's while I was training because you don't get paid when you're a trainee solicitor. Well, you didn't back then. So I just loved the whole scene and I applied for a job here, and that was 25 years ago. And now I'm the managing partner. And so we're kind of a full service law firm in the city, but historically the firm has acted for Irish musicians going back to the days of Thin Lizzy and Christy Moore and all of the bands, the Bothy Band and everybody who was out there in the good old days. And so we've a kind of a broader, I'd say we're not what you call a traditional music lawyer firm, neither am I. So I'd have a broader practice. So I do a lot of commercial work and general intellectual property, which would include copyright, music and entertainment, visual arts, and trademarks. I do a lot of trademark work. So, I'm kind of passionate about trademarks for bands as well, in particular these days when there's more kind of endorsement. And I think a band is bigger than the music now, so your trademark and your brand rights are important too, as well as your music. So I've been practicing in the city for, as I said, 25 years here. And we, as a law firm, we don't really discuss who we act for. Some stuff appears in the paper from time to time. And we do a lot of, we would work with musicians, but we'd also work with venues, with people running festivals, with managers, and across the board, composers, generally across the board of the arts and entertainment industry.
Okay. Do you think the fact that you've got sort of like a broad experience before you came into law, has that been a help or a hindrance when it comes to actually practicing the law?
Yeah, no, I actually think it's great, especially working in media and radio. So you'd have a lot of contacts with people out there. But I also think it's good to work in a different industry when you want to practice law around that industry and to have some kind of on the ground experience as well. And for me too, I just like having a mix. There's a lot of people I know, they went through law and did nothing around it. And everybody they know are lawyers, and everywhere they go is full of lawyers. Whereas when I go out, it's a bit of it's a nice eclectic mix. And I think it depends on the individual itself as well. But I think it definitely does help. The years of sitting in the box office in Whelan's taught me a lot as well. So it's like, no, you're not on the guest list.
Excellent. Listen, Eileen, thanks very much for joining us tonight. Willie, over to you. Give us your LinkedIn profile there.
I don't have a LinkedIn, funny enough, but my name Willie Ryan, Limerick-based music lawyer. Well, entertainment really, but music probably fills at least 70% of my business. I do a little bit of authors and podcasters and other bits as well, but primarily known to be a Irish music lawyer, artist led. unlike Eileen, a lot of my clients are in the papers with my name attached, so I can say that I look after, Snow Patrol and Hosier and Amble and whatnot. Um, did law and business in UCD in the late 90s. Did a master's in IP afterwards. Then trained as a barrister down at King's Inns and was practicing being a regular day-to-day barrister in the early noughties. But huge love of music and slowly kind of crept into more and more music stuff. Started doing like the day-to-day kind of deck collection stuff for PPI and Irma and around the country, and then started doing some opinion session work for Irma and PPI and the record labels, and then started working with the Coronas about 20 years ago next year. Actually, we're celebrating 20 years at the end of this year, which seems like a long time. And then 15 years ago, came across Andrew Byrne, who became Hosier and taken to church, changed all their careers. And from that, when the Cranberries reformed, took on those guys. Yeah, and my practice is very form part of effectively the management team of nearly all those acts because the business and legal affairs across publishing and records and touring and merch is a daily occurrence. So there wouldn't be a day goes by that we wouldn't have something going on in at least one, if not all of their worlds, and particularly with social media and sync and everything else. So yeah, music lawyer based back home in Limerick. Yeah, so that's kind of the longer elevator pitch.
Yeah, no, that's very good. One question about you that I like. I think people might be interested in. You also kind of like, besides being based in Limerick, but you're also kind of like, you've also got kind of gigs coming out from the States. You have gigs coming out from London as well. So like, you're also someone who travels quite a bit as well to kind of to follow up that action.
Yeah, I tend to be on the ground quite a bit at conferences. So like the Great Escape, which is in Brighton every year, I'd be at. I go to South by Southwest most years. I'm actually just back from South by Southwest, which is in Texas. Again, it's a bit, like as Eileen said there earlier, we're kind of like silos in that you kind of a lot of it's self-learning, or you got to go out there to learn the business and meet people because the business is ever changing. And if I stayed at home in my office, whether it's in Dublin or London or Limerick, you wouldn't meet people to hear what's going on the ground, or you wouldn't hear what's changing. And at the moment, with AI, that generic term being so strong across our industry, that's means South by was a tech conference effectively,
Yeah.
and you're just learning about AI in different aspects of the business, from the recorded side right through to the marketing side, right through to absolutely being a game changer. So yeah, so I do go out and then I tend to be on the teams that I'm involved in. I tend to be the person who deals on the with the labels on the business affairs side. So meeting the record labels, whether it's in LA, New York, London, or wherever, kind of doing the quarterly or half yearly meetings or planning meetings. I tend to be the cannon fodder that's sent in there. Yeah.
Excellent. Listen, Willie, thanks so much for joining us this evening anyway.
Yeah, no,
Let's
pleasure.
start with one question for both of you. Start with you, Eileen. Like, how soon should an act have legal representation? Is there sometime, is there kind of like a stage that's too early or a stage that's too late? What do you reckon in terms of what's the best time for an act to kind of like talk about getting onto either you or Willie about representation?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's different stages, and Willie and I do a lot of work together. We also do some work on opposite sides of the table, which can be fun at times.
Yeah.
But one thing that we have come across recently is bands that are breaking up that have no structure or agreement in place. And it's probably one of our pet peeves that every time we're out, we decide we're going to try and get some band agreement together they can all use, because they come into us, they've no agreement. They don't, there's a little bit of a lack of understanding of who owns the rights, so who's entitled to the songwriting and the publishing. The recording is fine, entering a management agreement is generally fine, but things like who owns the name. So, did one or two people set up the band, come up with the name? Did the others join? What happens if there's an issue? How can you get somebody out of the band? And that's where things fall apart and they end up in with either of us or both of us at some point. And we have to tell them the bad news is that they fall under default Irish partnership law, which is, I can't remember when it was at 18 something, 90 something act, that really is not fit for purpose in dealing with the band breakup. And they spend a lot of time fighting over things where there's not necessarily a lot there to fight over. Where early on, get a structure in place, decide Are we going to act together as a band in inverted commas? There's no legal definition really of a band. Are we going to share everything across the board? You know, are we, when we register our songs with them, are we all co-writers or are we not? Have we certain people with authorship ideas? Who owns the rights in the name? And if we do split up, can a majority actually decide to ask nicely somebody to leave for certain reasons? And if you agree all this, it can be put in a fairly simple document and save you a lot of hassle down the road. Like under a partnership agreement, the majority can't kick out one member of the band, even if they did something. They have to dissolve the whole thing. Now, we can find practical workarounds on that, but it's way easier for a band, I think, in the early days to get those structures in place and go to somebody just to get it set up. So that would be the first thing I would say, and the first time you need to look for a lawyer. I always kind of think an accountant is nearly before a lawyer, apart from maybe on a structure like that.
Okay. So really what
Yeah.
like when an act comes to you then, like I mean, are they do they know what they're coming to you for? I mean, do they've also been told by someone you need a lawyer, they might have someone sniffing around, might deals might be offered. When the act comes to you, first of all, are they aware of what you can do as a kind of like as a solicitor who knows about music inside out?
I think acts they can come at you each in which every way. Primarily, it's when they have something in front of them that needs to be signed and negotiated, they'd come in front of you. So that tends to be at the start. If a manager starts working with them, they'll be told, "Here's a management contract. Go and get it reviewed." Or if a record label comes across them, they're having a moment on TikTok or they're setting up venues or whatever, they might be offered some deal. And again, they're asked to go and get an independent lawyer to look at it, and most of them do the thing. It's either word of mouth and or Google. They look for music lawyer, and there is kind of two of us sit at the top of the tree in Ireland, so they either go to one or the other of us. You know what I mean? It's pot luck or unlucky for them which one of us they get ultimately. And as Eileen said, look, we work on a lot of acts together as well. So, but yeah, so it tends to at look back when bands get in trouble, they need lawyers, but that tends to be more historic stuff. So a lot of our first interactions with bands is if they're offered a management contract or if they're offered some kind of deal. Either which way on that, if it's a band, as Eileen said, your advice would be, guys, you need to kind of structure something here. Otherwise, you're going to default under, as Eileen mentioned, the 1890 Act, which all as whether you're opening a local shop together or whether you're in a band together, a partnership, it's equally, all assets and liabilities equally, so, whereas the songwriter might write all the music and do everything else and have come up with the band name, but unless it's structured properly, all assets of that partnership will be equal. So, if the drummer decides to throw his pram out of the, out of the, or his toys out of the pram, it becomes difficult because he's got an equal ownership in the name, and the merch and live and everything else. So the quicker you can resolve and get these things structured at the start of any relationship, the better, so everybody knows where they are. What you don't want is a scenario where, and I'm not picking on drummers here, but the drummer thinks X, the lead singer thinks Y, the guitarist might be thinking Z, and ultimately all three of them might be a little bit right, a little bit wrong. Band agreements are simple. Like, how as an industry, we don't have a standard template that bands should go, this is rather than I'd sooner fall into a de facto template than the 1890 Partnership Act, that's for sure. But so that's in terms of what you'd be advising a band to do. But in terms of management contracts, look, the difficulty with that is most young acts tend to be managed by someone local
Yeah.
or a family member or some kind of someone in the local music scene that may not have the skill or expertise that they would need to have. I'm not saying that that person shouldn't be a manager because there's plenty of examples of somebody who was a pal who became a great manager. Jim Lawless from the Coronas, a perfect example. As I said, I've been working with them for 20 years, but most of the time, the mummager or the dadager is not the correct act or the correct person. And I would say that for the following reason, whether a record label signs you or a promoter wants to work with you or an agent wants to take you on. If you take the record label, Whether a record label is big, small, indie, or major, they're going to have budgets to work with each act, right? So if a label is going to work with you, they're going to put in a certain amount of money towards giving you an advance, some money for recording, some money for marketing, some money for creating assets like videos and social media, some marketing money, some promo money, whatnot. They're going to put a budget, right? And each label have their budget. So as you get into the bigger labels, they have bigger budgets. But for the smaller label, proportionately, it's the same. They're not going to sign an act unless they believe that the manager of the ship knows what they're doing, no matter how good the band are. And that's tale as old as time. I've seen many buzzy Irish things happen, and we're all in different WhatsApp groups. And if it's a certain manager that's associated with it, or they're being looked after by Y, the amount of from man or labels that will just go, no, not for us. It's incredible. Like, and acts probably don't even know they've lost their moment before it's even started because of who's managing them.
Mm.
So whoever, if you get into management or you're looking for management, you got to make sure it's someone that can, sit in rooms and, adequately represent you, know what they're talking about and have a plan, know how to execute a plan, and not absolutely a waffler or having a clue what they're doing because that will ultimately hinder you and ultimately end up in a car crash, you know?
Yeah. So I'm curious about that. To just we have to kind of
Mm.
like figure in on that one in a second. Sometimes with acts, they don't know this information. They're not privy to these kind of WhatsApp groups. They don't know what's going on. Would you advise them basically? How did it get around? Because you, as a lawyer, can't turn around to an acting, or maybe you can in the privacy of your chambers, turn around to an act and kind of go like, "Listen, your man's an absolute another idiot. You don't want to be getting involved with him because like that's obviously quite unprofessional." But I'm very sure there might be times when you're tempted to do so or have done so.
Yeah, you got to be like a lot of the artist recommendations coming to us is because a manager might have said you should go to Eileen or Willie, right? Um, and then it gets tricky if they're the ones that recommended to you and you know in your heart.
Exactly. That's the next question, the conflict of interest between managers and their clients.
Exactly. So, whereas, look, whether the act comes in independently or organic to me, or whether it's word of mouth or whatever which way, I would always say to an act, has that manager given you, and whether like a lot of those managers have become pals of mine over the years or whatever, I would have said, has that manager put a 6 to 12 month plan in place? Have you spoke to other managers? Have you spoke to other lawyers as well? Because you should get a feel because everything is subjective, and we all have different ways of working together. And I think at least if they've had opportunity to sit with another manager or maybe two, they can see different styles. Same with lawyers. You know what I mean? I just had a consultation there at 4 o'clock with a client who's got some offers in. I said, look, it's great that you've come, but I think you should also make sure you speak to another lawyer as well. Just so I actually gave him your name, Eileen, strangely enough. But just because it's at the end of the day, I should be confident enough that I know what I'm doing, but someone should feel that they've spoken to other people because there's different ways of doing things and different advices. And it's the same with managers, before you put pen to paper, because a management contract tends to be no less than 3 years or two albums, tends to be the kind of magic sweet spot where it's long enough for a manager if the band gets going that they have some piece of success and tied in, and it's short enough that an act feels like they're not too tied into the future. It's kind of the sweet spot. But ultimately, if you're 6 months into a 3 year deal, and you hear that, oh Jesus, the record industry hate my manager. They all think he's a buffoon. 2.5 years is a long time waiting around to get another one, right? So that's why I always say get a plan, whether it's 6 months or 12 months, just to make sure you're aligned. And what's happening, and it happened a lot during COVID, is meeting managers on Zoom and not even hanging out with them because it's very subjective. Dealing with somebody every day on your creative and making sure you're happy with the plans and making sure that that manager is representing you in the room the way you want it to be represented. And so and I know Eileen's the same. We always push for trial periods, whether that's a 3 month trial period or a 6 month trial period, because it's one thing a manager promising you the sun, moon, and stars when they're courting you and say, look, I'll get you a record deal, I'll get you this, or whatever, sign the contract, and then them not delivering because that won't be in the contract. Like it will not be manager will get you X, Y, or Z. That tends not to be there. Manager contracts tend to be very simple. How long it lasts for, what their role is, what they can commission, and how long it's for. It doesn't get into the nitty gritty of they promised the sun, moon, and stars because that would be very hard to contract for, right? So yeah, so when you're getting into that relationship, it's about making sure you date a few people and then before you sign the contract. But
But
again,
I think as well, just on
mm,
that, you probably agree. I mean, a management agreement can tell a lot about the manager as well. So, I mean, if I get a management agreement for a young band starting off with a manager that you may not have heard of, that might be their buddy and could end up doing a great job, but might not, and they're trying to sign them in for 5 or 10 years with long sunset clauses, you're going, hang on a minute, right? There are things that I've seen put into management agreements that really try and bind a band for really long periods, with these awful clauses if they try and get out of the agreement and stuff. And I'm like, that's not the kind of relationship that a developing band needs. And then on the other end of the spectrum, I've seen in recent years a few people setting up and doing stuff, whereas it's 1 year or 2 year trial, or let's see how it goes,
Yeah.
and also have a very fair out, so that, in the event that, let's say, there is a deal on the table and part of the deal is one of the bigger international management companies, that there can be some kind of exit and a little bit of flexibility. So you're trying to, I suppose it depends who we're acting for as well. If you're acting for a manager, you want the agreement to make sure you're protecting them more. If you're acting for the band, you want the band to know that the manager can do the job, they can do whatever they need to. But if push comes to shove, that you're not tied into this relationship that can go toxic for too long without an out. And that's so the agreement that comes across your desk in the first instance can tell you a lot. And also then, how did they meet the manager in question? So, those two initial things can say, you know what, I actually don't really need to spend 3 hours redlining this agreement
mm,
because there's many red flags in it.
Okay, so just want to kind of like me, I suppose, take up with Ollie now. What Woody was saying there.
mm,
There's someone's looking for a lawyer. I mean, and they're googling music lawyers in Ireland. Two, you're at the top of the tree. Obviously, two of you can't handle all the business for lots of reasons. You know what I mean? There's conflict of interest, and there's just like sheer volume. Are you also recommending people, Eileen, in the UK and or US? Like, obviously, there's loads of other lawyers in those places because they're kind of like accepted music centers. We'll have more lawyers. We see it kind of come at Ireland Music Week. People come over. We see people come over scouting and all that. So maybe talk a little bit about that. Is it often the case that you have to recommend people elsewhere just because you can't take on the client?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's funny you say that, because a lot of the time I would recommend Willie, because I'm actually constricted in some ways with regards to jurisdiction because of my qualifications, insurance, and everything, right? So I tend to stick to Ireland. Unfortunately, I would have liked to have gone elsewhere because there's a lot more stuff happening outside of Ireland. But if I get a complicated, record deal in, I would automatically ring Willie and say, "Are you conflicted? Would you have the capacity to deal with this?" And or else, if it was UK and I knew Willie couldn't do it, we would have kind of a circuit of lawyers around the place. In various jurisdictions that you could recommend people to if you needed to. So it really depends on what it is, that comes in. And if we feel like we like to keep Irish music in Ireland, and we like to keep the professional services around Irish musicians in Ireland, because I think we do a better job for the Irish musicians. Here, we understand it, but if they need people outside the jurisdiction, there is definitely people that we know all over the world. And that's probably why we go to conferences all the time as well. I mean, the ones I go to aren't just music conferences. There's a lot of intellectual property conferences. So
Yes.
you'd be meeting people who do music entertainment trademarks, I can deal with all kinds of issues, or all kinds of agreements, content creators, gamers, all that kind of stuff. But part, I think, of if you work in the intellectual property or entertainment industry, you need an international network. It's really important.
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, I
Woody,
think,
what do
Jim,
you?
to just to pick up where you're
Sorry.
saying, look, I mean, Ireland is going through a purple patch at the moment, so there's more bands and more deals being done than ever before, and obviously then there's all the historic stuff that needs to be continuously serviced. So there is you know, a quant. We can only do some. No, there's only 24 hours in the day, so you can't be taking on everything and anything. But we do try to keep it. Within Ireland, as I say, look, if I can't do it for whatever reason, either capacity in a given time, if I'm in the middle of something else, or I'm conflicted for whatever other reason, my go-to would be Eileen. There is others, The reason we like to keep it within Ireland is because if an act goes to a UK lawyer, and there's some great ones there, and some of them are great pals of mine, it tends to de facto then fall to they'll recommend UK managers because
Okay.
that's their circle of trust, right? And then if it's going to UK managers, tends to be UK accountants. Then they tend to sign to PRS via IMRO. Then they end up signing with Collective or PPL rather than RAPs. And it's nothing that the English lawyers are doing nefariously to keep stuff away from Irish accountants or whatever. It's just that that's their circle and their default. Check the box. Okay, have they signed with a PRO? Sign here's the PRS form. English manager. And if it's an English manager, it tends to be English crew because again, managers work with certain tour managers and certain sound guys. So the whole ecosystem tends to, that one move or an act might simply start with an English lawyer, tends to end up a domino effect that their entire team ends up being English. Um, and that's what we try to avoid. Not that we've anything against English, but it's nice to grow our business here. And I think, you know, yeah, so that's kind of, my rant about trying to keep everything
No,
Irish.
it's very that's a very good point because it basically
Hmm.
means you're growing the industry here by kind of keeping the band here as well, you know. So
No,
when
absolutely, and I mean, there's plenty examples like the Hosier, the Amble teams, are all predominantly Irish, whereas some of the other acts that would have started with a UK lawyer end up with UK management and now have UK
Yeah,
crews and stuff.
I'm
So
thinking of a few of those. I'm thinking of a few of those now. And just as you say it, I'm not going to name any names, but
yeah,
they did start with an English lawyer, which led to an English manager, and basically their whole crew when they came back to tour here were all English. No,
yeah,
again, just
yeah.
English people. Yeah.
Yeah, and then I mean, what happens is as Irish bands tend to use Irish people, the busier some of the accountants are, or some of the managers are. I mean, they end up hiring more people here, and the business grows and it gets better. And as the bands tour, as the Cranberries got bigger, some of their crew now got so established, went on to be with the Corrs and have defaulted back onto Hosier's team now. They've brought new people in who are now on the Amble team. So you're growing your business and expertise all the time. Whereas if the skill set is out of the UK, it's not benefiting the Irish industry, and then that has a knock-on effect who's paying tax where, and particularly if the act has got a UK accountant and they're signed to PRS, they tend then to have their companies in England, so there's nothing flowing back here. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, so basically, it's a multiplier effect by virtue of them kind of taking the first step elsewhere. The multiplier effect means that all those jobs and all those kind of fees go elsewhere as well.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
So then that kind of like behoves us then to kind of wonder like, is it like what can be done? I mean, this is an aside, but what can be done to have more music lawyers in Ireland then? You know, I mean, I mean, are there more people at your firm? Like, I mean, Eileen, kind of like, I mean, who could step up? Are you seeing other people, Willie, who are based here stepping up as well?
I suppose we're trying all the time to look for people to set up and train. And yeah, I definitely now have people here. And I suppose, the work where you need more assistance would be the bigger stuff I do on trademarks and infringements and things like that. Whereas if you're dealing with the band, sometimes I just deal with it myself because you can't have two lawyers on it. But I think now I'm probably getting to an age where I'm feeling it's time to get more people in. It's time to share the knowledge. And Willie and I've actually discussed this as well. Getting some of the juniors to start off in the management agreements, teaching them. But there's no real course you can do in music rights. There's probably different ones through WIPO or around the place. And BIM, I think, might change things as well.
Hmm.
They have a new business music degree course, but it's pure experience. Like
Okay.
that's really the only way you're going to get it. And I think the thing about it is the other reason we're quite passionate about growing the industry here is there was like the firm I'm in would have done a huge volume of music law back in probably the 70s, 80s, and even the early 90s. And then a lot of stuff migrated to the UK. So if you don't have the work of the quality, it's hard to build a practice. So it's to try and create that ecosystem here so that you've got everybody around it. And, there's still other people out there who do various other elements of things on licensing, on copyright and all of that kind of stuff. So, I think we've got a good enough basis and we could definitely look at growing it a bit more.
Right. Going back a few steps now, Willie, and like I'm just curious about something. So when an act comes to you and they've got a management contract on offer, and you're talking to them for the first time, this is the first time they've come into your office. Are you also kind of like able to kind of like help them find agents, help them find kind of publishers, help them find labels? Do you want to talk a little bit about that like the post scouting element of things? You may have found an act who haven't got any of those. Like, is this something that's very common in music law circles? Is this something that kind of like you see yourself as a kind of like a speciality?
Yeah, yeah. I mean, lawyers are leaned on more and more by
You're
managers.
sociable people.
Yeah, but also, as a trusted source of new music as well, sending it. So, if an act comes in, but if they get I mean, if an act is reaching out or they've been recommended, they tend to have something happening. And you kind of have to make a judgment call whether you take them on or not. But let's say you are working with them. Then if they don't have a manager, your first role is to go and find them management, and because we deal with management companies all the time. You might go, okay, if it's a metal act, there's 4 or 5 managers in the UK that fit that genre, a couple in Germany, a few in the US. You would circulate it around to that world. If it's pop, there'd be a certain world of managers. If it's whatever, so you kind of know the world that do, and then those managers, when they see my email pop up, they go, well, he's a trusted source. Like he's not going to send us something that's woeful or whatever. So, that's how they tend to work. And it's the same with the A&Rs. It's like either A&Rs would send me an email going, hey, Willie, this is ticking on viral on TikTok or it's streaming or whatever. Are you on it? Sometimes you are, sometimes you aren't. But it also works the other way around. If an act comes in and they're having a ridiculously viral moment, you know, you got to tip off the A&Rs in that world. You'd say, look, have you seen this or whatever? It's a new client, whatever, it's streaming 1 million a week or whatever. There's no
Mm,
label, there's no manager or whatever. So it tends to be like, as I said, you kind of the players in those particular genres or labels that would suit to start the conversation. Or if there's one offer in, makes sense to try and get a second offer if you're negotiating it and get a third one in or whatever. So yeah, and over time you just get to know all the. Look, I'm at this now, Jesus, 20 odd years. So, and luckily because of Hosier at a really good level for 15 years, and and because of that, you're dealing with the labels a lot. And I'm very fortunate. I have a client called Johnny McDade, who's a very well known and respected writer producer who's the A&Rs are reaching out about all the time to write with their clients. So, and then at these conferences, you're invited to these different showcases and you're meeting people, or at the Great Escape, you're bumping into people. So, yeah, and it's a two-way street. Like, I mean, I've had, A&Rs just reach out regularly saying anything happening in Ireland, or are you across this? We saw this Irish thing. Are you on it or whatever? Because they know that if they sign an Irish act, it makes more sense to have an Irish team on it because if it's going to grow out of here. So makes sense to have the Irish lawyer, if possible, the Irish manager, whatever. It makes sense for them if they're trying to break something, and particularly if it's early. If it's super, super early and they're only giving some development money or maybe some funding or whatever, it would make sense to have some kind of the ecosystem here working on it. So yeah. Yeah,
okay.
so we are kind of a music lawyers, and particularly in the US, are kind of nearly an A&R filtration process.
Okay, so that's kind of like the starting process when a band gets involved. I mean, but let's take it to the very end of the thing, and we're going back to where you started with the kind of the band who were breaking up. What about getting bands out of kind of like shitty contracts that they signed early on in their career? Is that a skill set? Is that something that's possible, or do you try your damnness to make sure that doesn't happen in the first place by steering them away from those contracts?
Yeah, I mean, I think there can still be shitty contracts around, but they're less, and also the law, not to get too turgid on the legislation and the most recent European copyright legislation, where you can actually for the first time revisit a contract. And you also have transparency with regards to royalty payments and certain circumstances and that. So things are changing a little bit more, I think, in music law. I think people are, there's words out there like, bridging the pay gap. Maybe in particular in the whole digital marketplace has changed everything. People are realizing the artist needs to be paid. So, the basis of contract law is you're signed, and if the contract is enforceable, you're stuck with it, regardless of how long it is. I think we try and get to a situation that no matter what contract you sign, that there's a clear end to it, and there's also rights of termination. And now there's potential rights to revisit on a full sale of royalties and stuff like that as well. There's definitely some old stuff around there, and I think the changes in the way bands are, the income streams through streaming, and now the whole issue with AI and trying to get some kind of value to an artist is opening a bit of a clink in the armour of a contract as well, because, some of the really old ones didn't deal with digital rights. So I suppose the intricacy about music is all the various rights that exist within a piece of music and artwork, and then what you can do or cannot do with those rights. So whether it's the making available to the public right, it's the copying right, and digital kind of streaming and the digital marketplace brought in a whole revisiting of how those rights are used. And some of the older contracts mightn't actually have the legal right to do certain things. So, some of the labels might come back revisiting contracts and saying, we actually have been, dealing with streaming and digital rights now for 20 years, but we actually never got the rights. So can we get the rights? And that's where one of us would be able to look at it and go, well, actually, what they're offering you now is crap. So, and they shouldn't be doing this. So it's time to revisit your contracts. So I think the change in the market, the development of the more digital rights, streaming, AI and everything is opening the door on old contracts. And then on new contracts, it's just to try and make sure that they're balanced, they're proportionate, and there's a clear end and there's a clear out.
Cool. Last question for me, because I'm looking here and I can see there's a lot of questions in the chat, and the time has flown. 40 minutes goes very, very fast on these evenings. Last question for me, and this is for both of you. One, are you picky in terms of the number of the acts you take on? Do you say no a lot? And two, how much do you charge? Willie?
Very picky, very picky. And no, not really. It depends. It depends. If it's all about capacity. So if I'm in the middle of whatever else, like negotiating 3 or 4 other things, I'm not gonna take something on because it just wouldn't be fair. Do you know what I mean? Both to myself and to the act. Do you know what I mean? And then in terms of fees, I'm a tenner cheaper per hour than Eileen.
Yeah.
So how much is that then? That's a very unfair answer. Good answer, but very unfair.
Do you know what, Willie? My mother used to always say, you never ask a lady her age or her golf handicap, right? And you never ask a lawyer on anything that's been recorded how much they charge.
I love the way you said that, just to remind Willie, in case he didn't know, in case he'd forgotten, he's being recorded.
Oh, I haven't forgotten. I haven't forgotten. No, but look, in terms of, we'll say, how we tend to work in terms of the early deals, like your clock up time that you're just not going to charge for new acts, and that's just the reality of the situation.
So it's a bit like a manager. It's a bit like a manager. Sorry for cutting across you. It's a bit like a manager. Like if a manager comes in all guns blazing, looking for his or her 20% from day one, that's a red flag. So I kind of get a feeling with you is that it's kind of like it's a getting to know each other business. That if it's a case that there's going to be longevity here, you tend to be a little bit kind of like less likely to send out those early fee notices.
Yeah, and I think in term about being picky with acts. Look, you're not going to take everything on because it's just not practical. But like if someone comes to you, if it's the right manager or right label trying to get something signed, you might go, look, the right people are involved here. You'll stay in because you know that things are going to be done right. You know what I mean? Whereas if it's the wrong team completely around it, you go, do you know what? Life is too short. Just let it off. You know what I mean? And yeah, so and again, it depends, and sometimes you might be at the right place at the right time and say yes to something, and then look, I've had scenarios where acts that I love now, I just didn't have capacity at the time, but you just can't take on everything, that's just the reality of it.
Can we say as well, Willie, as well to Jim, like an act can help themselves as well, right? So don't go in not knowing anything, not have anything organised, not having a clue and expect, a lawyer to do everything for nothing or next to nothing. What I have found is acts that come in, they'll say, I have a management contract, I've read through it, generally I'm okay. Can you tell me if there's any red flags and can you explain these following things? You do that. It's a very neat little piece of work. You have a call with them, you sit down with them and say, listen, you try and change X, Y, and Z, but at the end of the day, this is it. You get it done fairly quickly and you can be extremely reasonable and fair on any fee on that, right? Because that band is not take advantage of all your time. Remember, lawyers get paid and their business work on time.
Mm.
Whereas if somebody comes in not having a clue and wants to question everything and won't agree to anything regardless of what you say, then you're like, oh, here, you know. It's it's difficult. So I think for people to educate themselves a little bit first is helpful, and just try and use the time that you get with somebody wisely.
Yeah, and look, I mean, again, a lot of it's subjective. You get to read people. Like, I mean, I've done meetings where I'm 10 minutes into the meeting and I just know I have no interest working with this person. Do you know what I mean? Because they're a dose. And I mean, life is too short to be dealing with doses. You know what I mean? And or, I've had clients reach out saying, oh, we're working with so and so, we've been offered these deals, and I just know the manager's a dose to deal with. And again, life is too bloody short. You know what I mean? And look, and I can say that from a position where I'm lucky in that I've got some incredible clients and, make a really nice living. So I can be picky and choosy who I work with now. Do you know what I mean? So, whereas maybe 10 or 15 years ago, I probably had to deal with more of the doses than I probably wanted to. Do you know what I mean?
I know exactly what you mean. Exactly what you
Yeah.
mean. Thank you to both of
And you
you.
can probably guess some of the doses as well.
I'm not
But
going to go
anyway.
down that road, Willie. I prefer not to. You know what I mean? As Eileen has kind of pointed out, this has been recorded, and I prefer not to be kind of like applying the name dose to any manager's past, present, or future. But listen, it's been brilliant. So it's been really, really good. These times always go really fast, but we have a number of questions in. So I'm just going to ask you them. Question from Ash here, and will it make more sense to look for a lawyer before any label manager or agent? And what does it entail to be working with either of you? Is there any type of contracts like for labels or managers with a lawyer? It's a good question, actually.
Like all of engagement letters, setting out the rough fees and everything else. I mean, Eileen and I's are different. I have direct access by barrister, so our rules are a little bit different. And then I'm qualified in the UK and the US, so it's a little bit different in terms of my insurance, what I can do versus what Eileen can do. But yeah, I mean, there is an engagement letter,
Yeah.
sets out what.
The fees up front. I mean,
Yeah.
get an indication, don't go in thinking, no, I'll deal with it when it comes. And,
Hmm.
one thing as well, if you do come with a deal, though, a lot of the time, a label deal or even some management deals, they might give a contribution to legal fees.
Yeah.
Okay. And what about do you think it makes more sense to get a lawyer on board, first of all, before a manager or a label, or is very much a case of going back to what Willie said there about being picky and dealing with people that sometimes you want to see what the approach is, you want to see what the plan is. You don't want someone not very, very naive sitting across from you and you kind of realizing, oh Jesus, I have to educate this person from the get-go.
Yeah, I think if an artist expects the lawyer to get them the manager and get them the deal and get them whatever else, you know, I think the artist would want to be, you'd want to have some like ridiculous level of talent for a lawyer to take that on because there's a lot of hand holding. Do you know what I mean? Like now, there has been instance where I've taken on clients where it's been ridiculously early, but because the demos I was sent or whatever. So like Kingfisher would be a perfect example. Like I took them on before they were named because I got, Barry from Hermitage Green said he saw this band play out in the college in UL. He said you should go and see them. They blew me away. I met them the next day. They weren't even named. Like, but that would be the exception to the rule. And there was so much hand holding at the start trying to find them managers and labels or whatever else. Um, I keep saying to myself that I won't do that and that this is the year that I'm not going to do that. But lo and behold, you do get sent some music. And because we're ultimately, you end up being music fans, you try and help bands out and introduce them to people. So, yeah, as much as I don't like hand holding and are doing the de facto management or taking stuff on too early, and I keep saying I'm not going to do it. And I even think Eileen and I had lunch last week and I kept saying it. I just know I'm going to keep doing it. But, if I keep lying to myself long enough, it might eventually happen. You know what I mean?
So, you've answered the next question that's here as well about
Yeah.
if someone doesn't have a rec contract, how does it work for someone wanting to stay independent like that? So obviously from both your cases, if someone hasn't got a rec contract, hasn't got a team around them, they look to be independent, there's a lot of hand holding involved, as Willie has just pointed out.
Yeah, yeah. But I mean, there's plenty of ways of releasing independently as well. I mean, 10 plus years ago, we were kind of beholden to the record labels because they were the gatekeepers because they had the finance to pay for studios and to pay for marketing and to get you into HMV and golden discs. But as technology has developed and people can record at home and upload themselves to the DSPs, the role and the need for the record label as gatekeepers are gone. So people can get much further down their careers now without having a record label involved and keep releasing and not costing them a fortune, you know? Yeah.
And they can get different types of agreements then for people to assist them with, like, getting in royalties, getting in payments, managing their catalogs and stuff like that. So yeah, there's different ways of doing things.
Okay. The next question is super specific, and both of you can feel writing, kind of saying book a consultation for this one. And this is
Go
about,
on.
can I use another artist's lyrics but slightly alter them? Like, recordings or what about recordings of old songs that are in the public domain? Use old poems as lyrics. Can you quote a line from a TV show like Mean Girls?
If it's in copyright, life plus 70 years, you need permission.
If it's in copyright, but if it's a public domain work,
Yeah.
it means it's out of copyright.
Copyright, yeah.
Okay.
So if it's in
Yeah,
And that,
copyright,
yeah,
you need permission. If it's in the public domain, that means out of copyright. You can do whatever you want with it.
And what about like something like there's a very specific example here. It's a Sinead O'Connor song. It's okay. I want to talk about myself swiftly. I want to talk about hunger. About changing those lyrics. Is fair? It's not. I know here. I'm looking at the two of you, and I'm thinking, no, Jim. Okay,
Move
let's
on,
move on.
Jim. Move
Yes, move
on.
on swiftly. Yes,
Yeah.
thank you, Willie. Thank you, Ali, my learner friend.
Sorry, Jim, can I just jump in there for 1 second? I think Kira means public domain as in it's out in public, not that the copyright is expired. And just there's a nuance there. If Willie and Eileen might just,
yeah.
I think what Kira means is it's out in the public domain, as in it's a saying in public. But actually,
Oh, okay.
somebody wrote that in a screenplay, so it's not technically in public domain. Do you know what I mean? There's
Yeah,
a
so
difference
there's
between lawyers speak public domain and
Okay, yeah.
I think what
Yeah.
Kira meant.
there's a phrase for works that are out of copyright. So the author has died in 70 years, and we would call public domain works, or we call things like, we've orphan works, we've different things like that. But something being in I suppose, the general sense of a public domain, if it's something that's capable of copyright protection, still in copyright, you can't copy it and you can change it around.
Yeah.
There's a question here, and it leads into something that both of you mentioned in passing, and that's how's AI changing your deals and the way you deal with music, bands, labels, etc.
Well, AI, I mean, ChatGPT is just taken over from Google for people Googling the answers to some of the questions, but it's still, a lot of it defaults back to US law or mumble jumble version of the law. So yes, you're getting advice, but doesn't tend to be the right advice. Do you know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, it can be tricky because if you got someone that thinks they have all the answers before they come into the room because they've put the contract into ChatGPT, it's like, you're not going to second guess yourself and 20 plus years experience in deals versus what ChatGPT answers given them. Do you know what I mean?
Hmm. I think as well, like I think as well, but we're also kind of seeing is there's been certain reports from the WRC, from the Workplace Relations Commission, and they're seeing kind of like lay litigants coming in with massive pages and reams of arguments, all of which contain AI hallucinations because they are lay litigants after all. So are you seeing like, and I suppose as well, maybe the question refers as well to kind of like are you seeing kind of like AI being mentioned as a source as something in terms of contracts, in terms of a creative force? Is that coming in there? Although I read some stuff in Rolling Stone magazine the other night saying that like, well, actually, it's going to be like AI will not be part of it because AI is just taking existing copyright work and repackaging it.
Yeah, I mean, I think one of the things you've in is you can put in, and again, it's very technical, but you put in contracts that you are not giving consent, you're withholding copyright with regards to large language models training on your copyright work. So that's the kind of thing that you're seeing.
Yeah.
You're seeing people asserting their rights, which technically under the legislation is what they kind of need to do. So that's one change that you're seeing on the actual legality of AI learning on your music. And I suppose something I think we probably need to see in the future is the copyright. If you're using, will you have to disclose if you've used AI in creating a piece of work in order to claim copyright protection?
Okay.
Yeah.
And like, I mean, are you seeing kind of like, are you doing any deals which involve kind of like AI brands? I mean, is this something which is kind of coming up where like brands are coming to you or like, talking about the use of AI in creating artistic works?
Well, I mean, like there's many positives to AI. I mean, like it's a great tool for marketing and analytics and being able, because there's so much data out there now for artists, right? So there's so many AI tools that artists can use to pull in all the data that's available to them. And which is great. And then a lot of musicians are using different versions of AI, whether it's Sono to make videos or to make posters. But each thing you're encroaching on, you have a poster designer that now is not going to get the gig because you're using AI to make the gig, or if you're doing a cheap video via some app because AI is creating the video
Yeah.
or the visuals, well, that means a creative person in that world isn't getting the gig. And so, like it, me, and then there's whatever. I was at South by Southwest there, and there was loads of AI panels, and I think they think it's about 100,000 songs a day are being uploaded that are AI generated. Now, Spotify are taking most of them down as they're going up, but look, I mean, it's with us. We're going to have to live with it. It's been with us for a while, but um, yeah, there'll be good tools that will be useful. There'll be some bad tools that will be not be useful. It's just about finding, like, if someone writes a song and they put in saying, look, make it sound like Ed Sheeran or give me a lyric that's like Kingfisher. Well, then there, invariably, if that song comes out and it does end up sounding like that, you're going to end up falling back to the traditional models of infringement in court cases. Do you know what I mean? And if you get into discovery in that case, how did you write the song? Can you show us the files? And there's some code in there. Please give us some Ed Sheeran lyrics. Well, it's going to be a bigger slam dunk than the Shape of You trial. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Okay, so there's another question in here as well, and I was just trying to reach over for my bookcase to see if I had the book here, which is there any recommendations for good music law readings? The Donald Passman one, is that still current?
Or the Anne Harrison book.
And Harrison, yeah,
And Harrison, okay.
Yeah,
yeah.
Anne Harrison is good. There's a guy called Ari Hursted. He's got How to Make It in the Music Business. That's quite a good book. The Anne
Yeah.
Harrison book is good.
Is there an up-to-date, remember the Music Managers Forum did a really good one, How to Dissect the
The
Digital
Digital
Dollar.
Dollar. Yeah, I have a copy of that up there somewhere. Yeah, that's
That's
good. It's a little bit out of date at the moment. Watch God, the new version of the Brave Breck Brothers, Jeff and Todd's book is good. I think that's a 2025 or maybe even be 2026 book. That's
but
good.
also, so the World Intellectual Property Office website, based in Geneva, they have a really good website, and they actually have a section on music, entertainment, and everything, and they have a lot of resources there. They're really good,
And
and
there's
it's all.
Simon's book, Simon Shar's book.
Oh yeah,
Was that last year? 2 years ago?
a couple of years ago, yeah.
I mean,
And they're
Simon no longer practices, but
yeah,
he has a book. Yeah.
Yeah, that's
yeah.
it. But if you get a chance, Willie or Eileen later on, maybe could you write them down in an email and just send them to me, and I'll distribute
Yeah.
them to people who want it. That'd be great.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much for your time, the two of you. Anyway, like it's been a very entertaining hour with two of you. Really appreciate it because I know both of you are really, really super busy. So I really appreciate the fact you spent a bit of your Tuesday evening with us. So again, thank you very much from FMC for all the kind of like the
Of
advice
course.
tonight, and we'll see you down the road.
Thanks, guys.
Cool.
Best of luck.
See you, folks.
Be good. See you later. Bye.